The most painful words I ever heard did not come from a stranger. They came from my own son when he looked at me and said, "You need to apologize to him, Mom, or you cannot stay here anymore." I still remember the silence that followed those words. The kind of silence that makes you realize your life has changed before you even have time to understand why. My name is Margaret Collins, and for most of my life, I believed family was the one place where I would always be safe. I never imagined that one day I would sit across from my own son and wonder if he still saw me as his mother or simply as a problem he needed to solve. I was 68 years old when that evening happened. I was a widow, living quietly, and spending most of my days enjoying the simple things I had learned to appreciate. A cup of coffee on my front porch, a walk through the neighborhood, phone calls with old friends. After losing my husband several years earlier, I had learned that peace was something worth protecting. But my relationship with my son, Daniel, had always been the most important part of my life. I raised him mostly on my own after his father passed away. I still remembered the small moments that shaped our lives together. Packing his lunches before school, staying awake when he was sick, working extra hours so he could have opportunities one never had. I never saw those things as sacrifices. To me, that was simply what a mother did. Daniel was my only child, and watching him grow into a successful adult was one of my greatest joys. When he married Victoria, I welcomed her into our family. I wanted my son to be happy. I wanted his wife to feel loved and accepted. I tried my best to respect their choices and give them space to build their own life. When Daniel and Victoria invited me to stay with them for a while, I believed it was an opportunity for us to become closer. Their home was comfortable, and they told me they wanted me there. I thought it meant we were creating a new chapter together. I did not realize that I would soon feel like a guest in a place where I thought I belonged. The evening, everything changed. Started as an ordinary family dinner. Daniel and Victoria had invited Victoria's father, Harold Bennett, over. The table was beautifully prepared, and everyone seemed relaxed. I remember thinking how grateful I was to have family around me. I had no idea that within an hour, I would feel like a stranger sitting among people I loved. The conversation started pleasantly enough. We talked about work, plans for the upcoming holidays, and memories from the past. I smiled and listened, happy to see everyone together. Then the topic changed. Victoria mentioned a disagreement we had earlier that week. It was something small, something I thought would pass naturally. But the way she described it made it sound much more serious than it really was. Before I could explain my side, Daniel looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was not anger exactly. It was disappointment. And somehow, that hurt even more. "Mom," he said, "you need to make this right." I looked at him, confused. "Make what right?" I asked. Then he said the words that stayed with me. He told me I needed to apologize to Victoria's father in front of everyone. He said it was the only way to move forward. I waited for him to explain. I waited for him to understand that I was his mother, that I deserved to be heard too. Instead, he gave me a choice I never expected from him. Apologize or leave. In that moment, I realized something I had never wanted to believe. The person I spent my entire life protecting was now asking me to prove that I belonged in his life. And as I sat there quietly, I made a decision that would change everything. I would not beg for respect. I would not fight for a place where I was no longer valued. I would simply remember who I was before anyone made me question my worth. After that dinner, I sat in my room for a long time, trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. A few hours earlier, I was simply a mother having dinner with her family. I was someone who believed I had a place at the table. But after Daniel's words, I felt like I was being asked to prove that I deserved kindness from the very people I loved most. The hardest part was not what Victoria said. It was the fact that Daniel stood beside her without asking what really happened. For years, I believed my son knew my heart better than anyone. I believed he knew that I was not someone who wanted conflict or attention. I had spent my entire life trying to make things easier for him, not harder. But that night, I saw a side of Daniel I had never seen before. The next morning, I woke up early, just as I always did. Old habits stay with you, even during difficult moments. I made coffee and sat quietly near the window. I looked around the room and noticed all the little things I had brought with me. Family photographs, a few books, small reminders of a life I had built before moving into Daniel's home. I started thinking about how I got there. After my husband passed away, I had spent years learning how to live independently. I was not someone who expected my son to take care of everything. I was proud of the life I had created. But when Daniel offered me a place in his home, I thought it was because he wanted me close. I thought it was because family mattered to him as much as it mattered to me. I never imagined that my place there could depend on whether I apologized for something I did not believe was wrong. Later that morning, Daniel came to talk to me. I could tell from his expression that he had already decided how the conversation would go. "Mom, I hope you understand why I did what I did," he said. I looked at him and waited. "Victoria's family is important to us," he continued. "I just need everyone to get along." His words sounded reasonable on the surface, but something felt wrong. He was not asking what happened. He was not asking how I felt. He was asking me to accept responsibility simply because it was easier for everyone else. "Daniel," I said calmly, "I have always wanted peace in this family. But peace does not mean pretending one person's feelings matter more than another's." He looked uncomfortable. I think he expected me to apologize immediately. Maybe he expected me to become the mother who always stayed quiet, the mother who avoided difficult conversations to keep everyone happy. But I was not that person anymore. I had spent too many years putting everyone else first. "Mom, why are you making this difficult?" he asked. That question hurt because it showed me that he did not understand. To him, this was about ending an argument. To me, this was about being respected. There is a difference between keeping peace and losing yourself. I learned that lesson the hard way. I thought about all the times I had defended Daniel when he was younger, all the times I believed in him when others doubted him. I remembered the young boy who once held my hand and told me I was the best mother in the world. It was difficult to connect that child with the man standing in front of me. But people change. Sometimes they become so focused on building their own lives that they forget the people who helped them get there. That afternoon, I made a decision. I would not argue with Daniel. I would not try to convince him that I deserved respect. Respect should never have to be begged for. I quietly started organizing my belongings. I did not know exactly where I would go or what my next step would be. But I knew one thing clearly. I would rather face uncertainty on my own than stay somewhere I had to constantly prove my worth. And as I placed my photographs into a small box, I realized something important. Leaving was not a punishment for Daniel. It was a promise to myself that I would never again allow anyone, even my own child, to make me forget who I was. The next few days after that dinner felt strangely quiet. I had expected to feel angry, but what I felt most was disappointment. Anger fades quickly, but disappointment stays because it comes from someone you trusted completely. I kept thinking about Daniel's face when he asked me why I was making things difficult. I wondered if he truly understood what he was asking of me. Did he see me as his mother, the woman who had always supported him, or did he only see me as someone standing in the way of keeping everyone else comfortable? I did not have the answers, but I knew I could not continue pretending everything was fine. I spent the morning making practical decisions. At 68 years old, I had learned that emotions could not solve every problem. I needed a plan. I needed to think clearly. I called my longtime friend, Susan Parker, someone I had known for more than 30 years. When she answered the phone, she immediately noticed something was wrong. "Margaret, what happened?" she asked. For a moment, I struggled to find the words. "How do you explain that the person who hurt you was the same person you spent your life protecting? How do you tell someone that your own child made you feel like you no longer belonged?" I finally told her everything. I expected sympathy, but what Susan gave me was something even more valuable. Perspective. "Margaret," she said, "you have spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. Do not forget that your feelings matter too." Her words stayed with me, because deep down, I knew she was right. I had always believed being a good mother meant making sacrifices, and it did. But somewhere along the way, I started believing that sacrifice meant accepting anything from the people I loved. That was a lesson I needed to unlearn. Later that afternoon, Daniel came home and noticed my boxes near the doorway. His expression changed immediately. "Are you really leaving?" he asked. I looked at him calmly. "I think it is best." He seemed surprised, almost as if he expected me to change my mind. "Mom, you do not have to do this. Just apologize and we can move past it." There it was again. The same solution. The same expectation. He still believed the problem would disappear if I simply gave in. "Daniel," I said, "I have spent my whole life trying to make things easier for you. But I cannot keep making myself smaller just so everyone else feels comfortable." He became quiet. I could tell he was not used to hearing me speak that way. For most of his life, I had been the person who encouraged him, supported him, and rarely challenged him. But love does not mean allowing someone to forget your value. I never wanted this to happen, he said softly. I believed him. That was the difficult part. I knew Daniel was not trying to destroy our relationship. I knew he probably believed he was doing what was best. But sometimes people can hurt you without intending to. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from people who do not realize the damage their choices create. That evening, I finished packing the things that mattered most. I did not take everything. I did not want to leave with bitterness. I took my photographs, my favorite books, and a few personal items that reminded me of my own journey. As I looked around the room one last time, I thought about all the memories connected to that house. The conversations, the meals, the moments when I believed I had found a place where I belonged. But I also realized something important. A home is not just a building. A home is a place where you feel respected, valued, and accepted. The next morning, I said goodbye to Daniel. There were no dramatic words, no angry accusations, just a mother and son standing in a moment neither of us expected. I love you, I told him, but I also have to love myself. He looked at me for a long moment. I could see confusion in his eyes. Maybe he thought leaving meant I was giving up on him. But I was not giving up. I was choosing a different path. As I drove away that morning, I felt a mixture of sadness and peace. I did not know what would happen next. I did not know if Daniel would ever understand why I left. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making a decision for myself. And sometimes, walking away is not the end of a relationship. Sometimes, it is the first step toward finding yourself again. The first night after leaving Daniel's house was one of the quietest nights I had experienced in years. I stayed at Susan's guest room while I figured out what came next. The room was small, but it was peaceful. There was no tension in the air, no feeling that I needed to carefully choose every word I spoke. For the first time in a long while, I could simply breathe. But even though I knew leaving was the right decision, my heart still felt heavy. I was not just leaving a house. I was leaving a place where I had imagined spending time with my son and building new memories together. That was the part that hurt the most. I did not miss the house itself. I missed the feeling of belonging that I thought came with it. Susan reminded me that starting over did not mean my life was over. Margaret, she said one morning while we drank coffee, you have spent years being someone's mother. Maybe now you get to remember who you are as a person. At first, I did not know how to respond. It was a simple sentence, but it made me think deeply. For so many years, every decision I made was connected to someone else. My husband, my son, my family. I rarely stopped to ask what I wanted for myself. I realized that somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that my own dreams mattered too. A few days later, I started looking for a place of my own. I did not need anything large. I wanted something comfortable and peaceful. After visiting several apartments, I found a small one-bedroom place about 20 minutes away from Daniel's neighborhood. It had a little kitchen, a cozy living room, and a window where I could see the trees outside. It was not the home where I raised my son, but it was a beginning. As I unpacked my belongings, I found an old photo album. Inside were pictures from Daniel's childhood. There was one picture of him holding a baseball glove, smiling proudly after his first game. Another showed him standing beside me during his high school graduation. I sat there for a long time looking at those memories. I did not want to erase the good years because of one painful moment. Daniel had given me many beautiful memories. He was still my son, but I was learning an important truth. Loving someone does not mean ignoring the moments when they hurt you. A week after I moved into my new place, Daniel called. I looked at the phone for several seconds before answering. Part of me hoped he was calling to apologize. Another part of me was afraid of hearing more excuses. Mom, he said when I answered. His voice sounded different, less certain. How are you doing? I told him I was settling in. I kept my voice calm. I did not want him to think I was calling to punish him with silence. That was never my intention. I did not think you would really leave, he admitted. I paused before answering. Daniel, when someone tells you that you can only stay if you accept being disrespected, you have to believe them. He became quiet. I could tell my words affected him. I was just trying to keep everyone happy, he said. I understood that. I truly did. But I also understood something he did not. Keeping everyone happy often means someone is quietly carrying the pain. And too many times in my life, that person had been me. I know you did not mean to hurt me, I said. But intentions do not erase the way actions make people feel. After the call ended, I sat by my window and looked outside. My life was different now. I was not surrounded by the familiar routines I had known for years. But I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Independence. I was not waiting for someone else to decide whether I belonged. I was building a place where I belonged because I chose it. I did not know what would happen between Daniel and me. I hoped we could repair our relationship someday. But I also knew that before I could rebuild anything with my son, I needed to rebuild my relationship with myself. For the first time in many years, I started waking up each morning with a different feeling. I was still carrying sadness from what happened with Daniel, but I was also beginning to discover a part of myself that had been quiet for too long. I had spent decades focusing on being a wife, a mother, and someone others could depend on. I never regretted those years because loving my family had always been one of the greatest joys of my life. But now, in my small apartment with the sunlight coming through my window every morning, I started asking myself a question I had forgotten to ask. What did Margaret want? The answer did not come immediately. At 68 years old, starting over felt unfamiliar. Many people my age were settling into routines they had known for years. I was learning how to create a new one. But instead of seeing that as something frightening, I slowly began seeing it as an opportunity. I joined a local community group at a nearby senior center. At first, I was hesitant. I wondered if I would fit in or if people would think it was strange that I was rebuilding my life. At this stage, but I quickly realized something important. Everyone had a story. Everyone had experienced moments where life did not go according to plan. And everyone understood the importance of finding purpose again. I met new friends, shared conversations, and started participating in activities I had never made time for before. I took a painting class, something I had always wanted to try but had postponed for years. I started taking longer walks around town. I even began volunteering at a local food pantry once a week. None of these things were dramatic changes, but they reminded me that my identity was much bigger than being someone's mother. Meanwhile, Daniel continued reaching out. His calls became more frequent. At first, our conversations were short and careful. We talked about ordinary things. The weather, work, small updates about life. I could tell he wanted to say more, but he did not know how to begin. One evening, he finally asked, "Mom, are you happy there?" I looked around my apartment before answering. I saw my books on the shelf, my photographs on the table, and the little plants I had started caring for near the window. "Yes," I said honestly. "I am." There was a pause. I think he expected me to say I was lonely or that I wanted to come back. But that was no longer my reality. "I am glad," he finally said. "I just wish things had happened differently." His words were quiet. For the first time, I heard regret in his voice. Not guilt because he had been caught doing something wrong, but genuine sadness because he realized the impact of his choices. "Daniel," I said, "I wish things had happened differently too." I wanted him to understand that I was not trying to punish him. I was not keeping distance because I wanted revenge. I was simply protecting the peace I had finally found. Over time, I noticed Daniel began asking different questions. Instead of asking when I would come back, he asked about my new friends. Instead of explaining why he made his choices, he started asking how those choices affected me. That change was small, but it mattered. Growth often begins with small moments of awareness. One afternoon, Daniel visited my apartment. For the first time, he looked around and smiled. "You made this place feel like home," he said. I nodded. "Because I decided it was my home." He looked at me thoughtfully. I think he was beginning to understand something I had learned the hard way. A person's sense of belonging cannot depend entirely on someone else's acceptance. It has to come from within. Before he left, Daniel stood near the door and said something I did not expect. "Mom, I think I forgot that you were your own person." Those words stayed with me after he left. Because that was the truth. For years, Daniel had only seen me through the role I played in his life. His mother, his supporter, the person who was always there. He had forgotten that behind that role was a woman with dreams, feelings, and a life of her own. And now, slowly, he was beginning to see me again. As the weeks passed, my relationship with Daniel entered a new stage. It was not the same as before, and I knew it could never simply return to the way things were. Some moments change a relationship forever. But that does not always mean the relationship is lost. Sometimes it means both people have to learn how to build something different, something stronger, based on honesty instead of assumptions. I could see that Daniel was trying. He was not perfect, and I did not expect him to be. I had spent my whole life loving him, and I knew change did not happen overnight. But I also knew that real change was shown through actions, not just words. One Saturday morning, Daniel asked if he could take me to lunch. It was the first time he had invited me somewhere without needing to discuss what happened. He simply wanted to spend time with me. That small gesture meant more than he probably realized. We went to a quiet restaurant near the park, and for a while, we talked about ordinary things. We talked about work, family, and the changes happening around town. It felt almost normal, but underneath that conversation was everything we had not yet said. Eventually, Daniel became quiet. He looked down at his coffee and said, "Mom, I have been thinking about that night a lot." I knew exactly what he meant. I waited for him to continue. "I keep telling myself that I was trying to keep peace," he said. "But I think I was actually trying to avoid making a difficult choice." His honesty surprised me. For months, I had wondered if Daniel understood what happened. Now, I realized he had been thinking about it too. "Sometimes the easiest choice is not the right one," he continued. "I chose what made everyone else comfortable, but I did not think about how it made you feel." I listened carefully. I wanted to hear those words, but I also knew forgiveness was not something that could be rushed. Healing takes time. "Daniel," I said, "I do not need you to feel guilty forever. I need you to understand." He nodded. "I do understand now." After lunch, we walked through the park together. It was a simple moment, but it reminded me of when Daniel was younger. I remembered walking with him when he was a child, holding his hand as we crossed streets and teaching him small lessons about life. Back then, I was the one guiding him. Now, in a different way, we were both learning from each other. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Victoria called me. I had not spoken with her since the night everything changed. Seeing her name appear on my phone brought back many emotions. I answered after a moment of hesitation. Her voice sounded different, less confident, more careful. "Margaret," she said, "I wanted to talk to you." I listened as she explained that she had been thinking about everything that happened. She admitted that she had focused too much on proving her own point and not enough on understanding mine. "I should have handled things differently," she said. I appreciated her words, but I also knew that rebuilding trust would take time. "I appreciate you saying that," I told her. "I think everyone involved has learned something from this." That conversation did not magically erase the past, but it was another step forward. I began to realize that sometimes people do not understand the impact of their actions until they experience the distance those actions create. Daniel had spent years believing I would always be there no matter what. In some ways, that belief made him careless. He never imagined I would actually choose myself. But by leaving, I showed him something important. Love and boundaries can exist together. Caring about someone does not mean accepting everything they do. As my life continued, I became more comfortable with the person I was becoming. I still enjoyed being Daniel's mother. I still cared about my family. But I no longer saw my identity as something connected only to the people around me. I was Margaret Collins, a woman who had lived a full life, faced difficult moments, and discovered strength she never knew she had. And the greatest surprise was that by choosing myself, I did not lose my son. Instead, I gave both of us the chance to find each other again in a healthier way. The months after everything happened taught me something I never expected. I thought rebuilding my relationship with Daniel would be the hardest part, but I discovered that rebuilding trust with myself was just as important. For years, I measured my happiness by how well the people around me were doing. When Daniel was successful, I felt proud. When my family was happy, I felt fulfilled. But I had forgotten that my own happiness mattered too. Now, I was learning how to create a life that was not built only around taking care of others. One morning, I received a letter from Daniel. It was not a text message or a quick phone call. It was an actual handwritten letter. That alone surprised me because Daniel had always been someone who preferred quick conversations and simple solutions. I sat at my kitchen table and slowly opened it. As I read his words, I could feel how much thought he had put into them. He wrote about his childhood, about the things I had done for him that he never fully appreciated, and about the moment he realized he had taken my love for granted. He admitted that he had spent years assuming I would always be there no matter how he treated me. Reading those words was emotional because they were exactly what I had hoped he would understand. Not because I wanted an apology, but because I wanted my son to truly see me. Daniel wrote that he had been so focused on keeping peace with everyone else that he forgot the person who had always been there for him. He said he finally understood that protecting a relationship did not mean ignoring someone's pain. It meant being brave enough to have difficult conversations. I sat there holding the letter for a long time. Part of me wanted to immediately call him and tell him everything was okay. The mother in me wanted to comfort him and tell him not to feel bad. But the woman I had become knew something important. Forgiveness and healing do not mean pretending nothing happened. They mean accepting what happened and choosing how to move forward. I called Daniel that evening. When he answered, his voice sounded nervous. "Mom," he said, "I was hoping you would call." I smiled because I could hear the difference in him. He was no longer speaking like someone trying to defend his choices. He was speaking like someone who was ready to understand. "I read your letter," I told him. There was a pause. "And?" he asked. I looked around my apartment. The place that had once felt unfamiliar now felt like my own little corner of the world. "I think you finally understand what I needed you to understand," I said. "I never needed you to choose sides. I needed you to remember that I was your mother before I was anything else." Daniel became quiet. Then he said, "I am sorry, Mom." Those words were simple, but they carried a meaning I had waited a long time to hear. Not a forced apology. Not words spoken because someone wanted an argument to end. It was an apology that came from reflection. "I am sorry that I made you feel like you had to earn your place in my life," he continued. "You should have never felt that way." I closed my eyes for a moment. That was the sentence I needed. Not because it changed the past, but because it acknowledged the truth. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and I started spending more time together. We did not rush back into our old relationship. Instead, we built a new one. One where we could speak honestly. One where I could express my feelings without worrying about disappointing him. One where Daniel understood that being my son did not mean he had unlimited control over my choices. He also started encouraging me to continue the things I had discovered. After leaving, he asked about my painting class. He wanted to hear stories about my friends at the community center. He became interested in the parts of my life that existed beyond motherhood, that meant more to me than he knew. Because for the first time in years, Daniel was not only seeing what I had done for him, he was seeing who I was. I often think about how different everything would have been if I had stayed quiet, if I had apologized just to avoid discomfort, if I had returned to the same situation without changing anything. Maybe things would have looked peaceful from the outside, but inside, I would have continued losing pieces of myself. Leaving was painful, but it also opened a door I never knew existed. It gave Daniel a chance to grow, and it gave me a chance to finally remember that my life had value beyond the role I played for others. As time passed, the relationship between Daniel and me continued to change in ways I never expected. We were not trying to erase the past. We were learning how to move forward while respecting what had happened. I think that was the biggest difference between the old Daniel and the person he was becoming. Before, he wanted problems to disappear quickly. Now, he understood that some things needed patience, honesty, and real effort. One afternoon, Daniel invited me to his house for dinner. It was the first time I had returned since I left. I will admit that I felt nervous. That house held many memories, both good and painful. I wondered if walking through that door would bring back the feelings I had worked so hard to overcome. But when I arrived, I reminded myself of something important. I was not returning because I needed approval. I was returning because I wanted to spend time with my son. There is a big difference between needing someone and choosing to be with someone. Daniel opened the door with a smile. He looked relieved to see me. "I am glad you came," he said. I smiled and stepped inside. The house looked the same, but I felt different. The rooms that once made me feel like I did not belong no longer had the same power over me. I had changed. I was no longer the woman who believed she had to accept anything to keep her family together. During dinner, the conversation was comfortable. We talked about my painting class, his work, and the small things happening in our lives. Then Daniel became quiet. I could tell there was something he wanted to say. "Mom," he began, "I have been thinking about something." I looked at him and waited. "I think I spent a long time believing that because you loved me, you would always forgive me without me having to change." His honesty surprised me. "I thought being your son meant I could fix things later," he continued. "But I realize now that love is not something you should take for granted." I listened carefully. Those words meant more because they came from understanding, not pressure. "Daniel," I said, "I never stopped loving you. But love does not mean there are no consequences. Sometimes people need to experience distance to understand what they were risking." He nodded slowly. "I know." Later that evening, Victoria joined us. At first, I was unsure how the conversation would go. Our relationship had become complicated, and I knew trust would not return overnight. But she surprised me. She apologized for the way things had been handled. She admitted that she had focused too much on being right and not enough on being respectful. "I should have listened to you," she said. "I should have tried to understand instead of assuming." I appreciated her honesty. I did not forget what happened, but I also did not want to spend the rest of my life holding on to resentment. Resentment can become a heavy burden, and I had already spent enough time carrying things that were not mine to carry. "I appreciate your apology," I told her. "I think we all learned something from that situation. It was not a perfect ending. Real families are rarely perfect. There are still moments when old feelings return. There are still conversations we have to handle carefully. But there was something different now. There was respect. And respect changed everything. I noticed that Daniel started including me in his life in a different way. He no longer treated me like someone who would simply adjust to whatever everyone else wanted. He asked for my opinion. He listened when I spoke. He understood that I was not just his mother. I was a person with my own thoughts, experiences, and feelings. One evening, I sat in my apartment looking at the photographs I had kept from the past. I saw pictures of Daniel as a child, pictures of my husband, and pictures of the life I had built. I realized something that brought me peace. The difficult moments in our lives do not always destroy us. Sometimes they reveal what needs to change. If I had never walked away, Daniel might never have understood what he was losing. And if Daniel had never reflected on his actions, I might never have discovered how strong I truly was. The distance between us had been painful, but it also created space for understanding. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give a relationship is the courage to step back and allow both people to grow. Looking back now, I realized the moment I walked away from Daniel's house was not the moment I lost my family. It was the moment I finally found myself again. For a long time, I believed that being a good mother meant always putting my child's needs before my own. I believed that if I loved someone enough, I could carry every burden, forgive every mistake, and quietly accept every disappointment. But life taught me something different. Love is important, but so is respect. A family bond is precious, but it should never require someone to give up their own dignity. When I think about everything that happened, I no longer see it only as a painful memory. I see it as a turning point. That difficult evening forced me to face a truth I had avoided for years. I had spent so much time being there for everyone else that I forgot I deserved to be there for myself too. After everything changed, my life became something I never expected. I discovered new friendships. I found hobbies I had always wanted to try. I created a home that reflected who I was, not just the role I played in someone else's life. My apartment was not large, but it was filled with peace. Every corner held pieces of my personality. My books, my paintings, my photographs, and the small plants I cared for every morning reminded me that a meaningful life does not have to be measured by how much you do for others. It can also be measured by how much you appreciate yourself. Daniel and I continued building our relationship slowly. We did not pretend that nothing happened. We did not erase the difficult conversations. Instead, we learned how to communicate in a healthier way. Daniel became more thoughtful. He started asking questions instead of making assumptions. He started listening instead of immediately trying to fix things. Those changes showed me that people can grow when they are willing to be honest with themselves. One afternoon, Daniel and I sat together at a coffee shop near my neighborhood. We talked about the past, but this time the conversation felt different. There was no anger. No need to defend ourselves. Just two people trying to understand each other. "Mom," he said, "I wish I could go back and handle things differently." I smiled gently. "We all have moments we wish we could change," I replied. "The important thing is what we learn from them." He nodded. "I think I forgot that you were not just my mother. You were a person who deserved the same kindness you always gave me." Those words meant more than any apology because they showed that he truly understood. I had never wanted Daniel to feel ashamed forever. I never wanted him to carry guilt. I wanted him to grow. And he did. The greatest gift he gave me was not simply saying sorry. It was learning to see me. To see Margaret, not just Mom. To see the woman behind the role. Today, I still cherish my relationship with my son. But I also cherish the relationship I have with myself. I no longer believe that keeping a family together means accepting everything silently. Sometimes protecting a relationship requires honesty. Sometimes love requires boundaries. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is step away and allow everyone involved to understand what truly matters. I still have the photographs from the years before everything changed. When I look at them, I do not feel sadness. I feel gratitude. Those memories remind me of the love I shared with my family and the journey that brought me to where I am today. My story is not about a mother who walked away from her son. It is about a woman who finally stopped walking away from herself. I learned that a person's worth does not come from how much they sacrifice. It comes from knowing they deserve compassion, respect, and kindness too. And sometimes, the hardest decisions in life are the ones that lead us back to who we were always meant to be.